Now, around. Hard around. Hard. Hard.
Farmers relied on oxen to do the heavy work right up until the middle of the 19th century. Only oxen had the strength to clear this rugged land of northeastern United States. These sturdy animals hauled logs and maple sap out of the forests, and they found a lot of work dragging boulders away from the planting fields. They pulled all kinds of farm equipment, even moved railroad cars. And, believe it or not, they moved buildings, always slowly, but always successfully. One farmer who relied on oxen was Isaac Oakley, who lived in Putnam County in the Hudson River Valley of New York State during the late 19th century. For 40 years, he faithfully noted his daily activities in a diary that tells us of his purchase and sale of oxen and how he used these animals. Isaac and his oxen must have been a familiar sight to the people of the neighboring village of Peekskill, because he often drove his animals there, taking apples, grain, straw, and logs to be sold, and bringing cider, flour, feed, and coal back to Putnam Valley. By the time Isaac Oakley died in 1906, the use of oxen had been declining for more than a half-century. Workhorses, Belgians or Clydesdales and Percherons, were faster, more versatile, almost as strong, but much more expensive. They eventually supplanted the oxen, and the horses were in turn replaced by tractors and other gasoline-powered machines. And now the oxen are owned by hobbyists, and the only time you see oxen is at fairs and competitions. Draft horses were just not available to the early settlers. By the early 19th century, even those farmers who were lucky enough to have a horse often preferred the ox for the heavy work. It could work on hilly terrain, and when the frost came out of those dirt roads, a yoke of oxen could pull a wagon through that deep, rutted mud. Just after the famous blizzard of 1888, Isaac Oakley noted that traveling was just as bad as it could be, but the oxen team gets along. Although one could hardly cut a dashing figure on oxback, it did provide a means of transportation. Emily Perry, who was born in 1841, rode from home to church and back a distance of nearly 7 miles in a cart pulled by one ox. Just for fun, the whole family could go for a slow summer ride in the ox cart. A team of oxen were easier and cheaper to maintain than one horse. Oxen could survive on grass and hay, whereas a horse required grain as well. Oxen stayed out in the pasture. Actually, they were only brought into the barn when the weather became too cold. They got by with just a little grooming, often without shoes. Nor did oxen need the expensive harness and other equipment that the draft horses required. While horses were fine workers, they were often skittish. A frightened horse would bolt and run away. As for the ox, well, the temperament suited it perfectly for heavy labor. The placid, obedient ox just kept right on working at his slow, steady pace. By all accounts, oxen seemed to have been immune to sickness. The farmer didn't have to worry about losing a day of working in the fields. Serious injuries were also rare, but the occasional accident did not represent a total loss. When one of Isaac Oakley's oxen fell out of the upper door of his barn, the animal didn't seem to be seriously hurt, but after 3 weeks of unsuccessful tending, the ox was taken to the butcher and later fed to the family. In the past, every farmer had some cattle that he raised for milk and beef for his family. Frequently, the farmer had more bull calves than he needed. Isaac Oakley certainly did. According to his diary, a young bull calf that he decided would become an ox was sold to another farmer for castration and initial training, which could begin when the animal was quite young. The farmer wanted 2 calves of the same age, whose characteristics implied that the animals would develop into a full-grown pair of well-matched oxen having similar disposition, agility, and size. Several breeds of cattle have produced good oxen. Being from the same breed was not critical. While a pair of the same color is a handsome sight, it is not necessary. Successful teams can sometimes look quite odd. There was no native breed. All cattle were imported. Devons, brought to the northeastern area in the earliest times, were multi-purpose animals. They provided milk and meat and muscle for heavy work. Other breeds such as Holsteins, Charolais, Durham Shorthorns, and Brown Swiss were brought into this country to improve either the dairy or beef characteristics, never to improve the strength of the animal. Training can begin when an ox has a partner and a name.
Duke and Dan, Jim and Abe, Gary and Bill.
All oxmen agree that calling each ox by name is necessary. Short names and ones that don't rhyme are preferred. The animal must learn to respond to commands.
Oh, now wait. Oh! Jerry, wake up. Wake up, Jerry.
Calling the ox's name while grooming him or giving him an affectionate pat will help develop that necessary mutual trust. Some farmers like to begin training the young steers individually to lead by slipping on a halter and leading them with a rope. Occasionally, a single yoke, much like a harness, would be used to train a single ox. Other farmers would yoke a young pair and just leave them alone to learn quickly the value of teamwork. If they didn't, they could hurt themselves. After that, they were trained together. Isaac Oakley always bought a pair of 2 to 3 year old steers which he continued to train. He worked them a few years and then traded them, usually making some money from the trade. Within a 7-week period in 1875, Isaac sold his team of oxen, replaced them with a pair of 3-year-old stags, another name for young oxen, traded them for a 7-year-old horse. These stags and the older horse were worth the same amount of money. Then he purchased another team of 3-year-old stags using his $30 profit. Early training involves several 15 to 20-minute sessions each day, with the trainer using his voice and his whip or goad as his only tools. His first goal is to get the animals to pay attention, then to keep their heads up and obey simple commands. He would talk to them constantly, and a good trainer treated his yoke of oxen firmly but affectionately. The trainer always stands with the team of oxen to his right. The animal closer to the trainer is called the nigh, N-I-G-H, nigh ox. It's chosen for that position because it's a little bit more intelligent than its teammate, or perhaps because it's more balky and needs more supervision, or maybe because it's shorter. That way the trainer can see the other or off ox more easily. Usually each animal occupies the original position as long as those two animals work as a team. When calling the oxen by name, the nigh ox is mentioned first. In the Ben and Jerry team, Ben is the nigh ox. The team is trained to learn just one command at a time. Most trainers concentrate on 6 voice commands. Herb Trombley, who raises and shows his oxen at fairs, trains his animals to respond to visual commands as well.
It's important that they stop or go when you raise your hand and turn. We do the same thing if we're trying to maneuver in a show. The judge is going to judge you by whether you have vocal contact or you use this. In some cases, we have teamsters that can't speak. They've had surgery, they have no voice. So the going to judge them strictly on a gestured method.
Standard commands are get up to move forward and whoa to stop instantly. But there are variations. A flick on the tail of the off ox, with a tap on the left front leg of the nigh ox, accompanied by the command haw, told the team to turn left. G would mean turn right, with the whip touches reversed. Stand means remain still until the next command is given. And back up, encourage the team to move in the one direction they really don't want to move. They had to learn this command so they could be hitched to a wagon or a sled. But this is tricky because the animals must be parallel or they can't do anything as a team. Herb's also added 2 extra voice commands.
So let's tell them to put in. Put in, Jerry. Slip in a little bit. Jerry, put in.
The ultimate goal of all this training is to get the team to step out together, to move simultaneously as though they are one animal. If they've obeyed and performed well, they should get a pat. If they're not behaving, the training session should continue until they're doing exactly what's asked of them. This is accomplished through patience, discipline, and repetition without dwelling too long on a certain task.
Weighed 2720 this morning. This is the 2800 class.
After the basic commands are mastered, the animals must develop their strength so they can eventually pull a weight that's up to 150% of their combined weight. Training began with no load at all except for a lightweight yoke. Then they learned to pull a pole, later a chain, and finally a weight. As the animals grow in size and strength, the load is increased in weight.
They weighed in exactly 2,800 pounds. We have 4,000 pounds on the boat.
If the weight is too great and the team cannot pull the load, it should be lightened a bit so the team doesn't lose its courage, but instead becomes accustomed to successfully pulling a heavy load. In order to pull a heavy load, the oxen needed just a few pieces of equipment. The yoke, the bows, pins to hold the bows in place, the staple that attached the yoke to whatever it was to be pulled, and sometimes shoes. The low cost of this equipment compared to that required by a horse was a distinct advantage to the early farmer. These few pieces could be made by the farmer himself or sometimes by a neighbor with more woodworking or blacksmithing skills. On February 18, 1891, Isaac Oakley took a stick to his neighbor to make a set of ox bows. He also had this neighbor make several of these simple vehicles that the oxen pulled. Another neighbor took 22 days in 1900 to make a new yoke for Isaac. Farmers in the northeastern United States used a neck yoke, the kind of brace that goes on top of the ox's neck against which he lifts. Both yoke and bows had to fit properly if the team was to work efficiently.
As that comes up, it has to be at the proper height on the animal,
just below the windpipe is the area. They have to leave. We don't want any pressure on the windpipe. There's a muscle area below it that they can push on. If you get this too high and push down the windpipe, then they'd have a lack of oxygen. They'd lose energy, and of course, they wouldn't move forward.
Since no two steers are alike, the left side of the yoke might not be the same as the right side.
Then when he's pulling, you can, I'll show you later, but I can see if you can, when that's back in this pulling area, force your fingers around that, like that. That's just the right tightness. It's not too wide. And let it come back into this muscle area right here, inside the shoulder blade. This is bone here, so it's got to be in here. That's where he pulls from, right there.
Because yokes could be outgrown quite quickly, a slide yoke was developed. This Yankee invention allowed the animals to move further apart as they were growing, as they were learning to work as a team, or as they were passing over some obstacle in their path. It could also slide inward, forcing the animals closer together when they were on a narrow trail. It wasn't used a great deal because it appeared just as the oxen age was ending. The work yoke was a heavy-duty piece of equipment, could weigh as much as 75 pounds. The weight was determined by the kind of wood that was used. Hardwood trees like maple, birch, and elm, cut during the winter when the trees contained the least amount of moisture, were obviously preferred. These hardwoods could withstand the stress applied to the yoke. The weight was also related to the size of the yoke. It was 4 to 5 feet in length, up to 11 inches deep, and 8 inches wide. The exact size depended upon the size of the team. Holes were drilled in the yoke so the bows could be inserted. Ox bows were made from small hickory or walnut trees. The wood is quartered lengthwise, and each quarter can make an ox bow. Shaving and whittling will shape the wood into a 2-inch wide tube, which is either steamed or soaked in hot water until it's pliable. It is then bent into the classical ox bow shape and left to dry while retaining that shape. The distance between the inside of the open ends of the bow determines the size of the yoke. An 8-inch yoke means the bows are 8 inches wide. Wooden blocks and pins are used to adjust the bow. A pin holds the bow in place after the bow has been inserted into the yoke. The pin is used to adjust the depth of the bow. If the bow is too loose on the ox's neck, the wooden blocks can be placed between the pin and the yoke to tighten the fit. Horns are a useful part of the anatomy that are considered in the design of the yoke. They prevent the yoke from slipping off when the team backs up or is pulling a sled or a wagon downhill. But they can cause accidental injury to the other ox or to the farmer. So brass tips are often placed on the horns, which can point up or down or out. If the horns are not even and symmetrical, weights can be attached to change the direction of growth. Mounting holes are drilled through the center of the yoke.
This is called a staple that bolts on down through on the bottom of the yoke to allow you to pull something, whether it's a wagon with a ring or, a log with a chain or whatever.
Whatever device the oxen have to pull will somehow be attached to that ring. The linking device is usually a long wooden tongue or a chain.
The load is 6,000 pounds. This team weighs 3180.
Extra heavy loads mean extra special precautions.
These are holes that are put in there, and we put bolts through there so that if this piece of wood ever broke, you wouldn't get an injury to the animal. It's simply a piece of wood would open up and crack, you'd hear it, and then you would stop and take the piece of wood off and go get another yoke.
Nothing else was required, except maybe shoeing the beast. If oxen only worked in the fields or on soft ground, shoes were not needed.
This stuff here is awful hard, and if you're working them on a surface that the shoe can't get down into, then it's like walking on high heels. It's not good for the little bones up here in the feet. So it's better to leave them barefooted until you're ready to just pretty much do pulling.
When shoes are needed, the cloven hoof of cattle means that each foot requires 2 shoes. Usually only the front feet are shod, because these feet dig in when the animal is pulling a heavy load. Shoeing oxen was not a simple task, and the local farrier probably didn't look forward to it. The average ox weighed more than 1,000 pounds and didn't want to have a foot lifted off the ground. Until a shoeing frame was devised that lifted him off the ground, this huge animal had to be thrown on its side and held still for the farrier to work. Isaac Oakley went to the blacksmith on January 2nd, 1897, to see when he could get his oxen shod. The actual shoeing wasn't done until the 7th of January. The blacksmith must have been quite busy taking care of both oxes and horses then. Once the trained team of oxen had reached 3 years of age, the animals were ready for the draft. Then 5 to 7 years of heavy work of all sorts was in front of them. At the Putnam County Agricultural Fair of 1853, one official stated, "The exhibition of working cattle was very good, and the fatted stock, which far exceeded former years, would have compared favorably with what I saw at Saratoga." Nevertheless, from 1865 to 75, the number of oxen decreased by 20 to 50% throughout Putnam County, while it held steady in Putnam Valley. Plowing the fields was an annual spring activity, and oxen worked very well on the rough terrain in the Hudson Highlands. Isaac Oakley always used his team when plowing. He frequently loaned them to neighbors, who apparently no longer owned their own. In May of 1891, Isaac joined 4 other farmers with teams to help a neighbor plow his fields. They turned the day's work into a social event for themselves and their families. After the work was done, they had a frolic. Isaac Oakley used his oxen to harrow the cornfields, bring in the dried hay, and even to maintain his section of the road. In fact, roads in Putnam Valley in the 1920s were still being graded by oxen teams as well as by horse teams. Oxen hooked to a wagon did a lot of hauling. Produce of all kinds was moved from farm to market. Isaac brought finished goods back to his small community. Coal to the minister's house and his own, a new boiler for the paper mill, feed for his animals. He used his team and wagon to move his daughter's family and possessions to a new home, and to transport family and friends to the Christmas celebration at church. Oxen were unmatched as a reliable source of power to clear the forest for the new farms of early settlers. Oxen teams not only helped Isaac Oakley clear trees out of the neighboring forest during winter, but they helped him clear some hard-earned cash, too. In the rocky area where Isaac Oakley lived, the last glacier had left enormous boulders everywhere. These and the rocks that the frost heaved up every spring had to be removed from the fields. Many of the rocks were put into the lovely stone walls that can still be seen. The large rocks were loaded onto a stone boat and then dragged along by the oxen. The power of these mighty animals explains how the early farmers were able to drag the massive boulders to form the roofs of the stone chambers that are so very common in this part of New York State. In order to move some of the largest boulders, two teams would have to be hitched in tandem. When ice was harvested from the lakes, the ice blocks were loaded onto the stone boat. The oxen would pull it to an ice house where the large ice blocks would last well into the following summer. Oxen were occasionally used as a power source to run a machine. A single ox would walk on a treadmill which powered a machine flail, thereby decreasing the amount of work the farmer had to exert to grind his grain. Or a team could have been yoked and forced to endlessly walk in a circle to grind grain or mash apples or grind bark for the tanning factory. Clearly a larger yoke should have been used so that the animals weren't almost breaking each other's necks. By the middle of the 19th century, transportation had vastly improved. It was the age of the railroad, of the steamboat, and of course of much better roads. It all made it possible to move milk products and beef cattle to market quickly and profitably. And it paid the farmer to select breeds either for the best milk or the best beef. As beef prices and the demand for veal rose, it was much more profitable for the farmer to sell his steers at an early age rather than train them for heavy labor. At the same time, large draft horses were replacing oxen. The horses could just plain and simply do more. They were faster on decent roads and cleared fields, and they were more suitable for pulling carriages, as well as pulling sleighs, and wagons loaded with goods. Today, oxen are owned by people who join groups like the New England Oxen Teamsters Association, who gather at country fairs and show them off at ox pulling competitions. These fairs provide just about the only place where they can still be seen as they used to be, as the obedient, docile, but powerful companions to the farmer.
Very light use of the whip, full control at all times. That's the way it's supposed to be done.
Come in. Let's go. Come on. Come on. Away from the stone. Heads up. Pick your heads up. Let's go. Come on. Come on. Let's go home.
partial funding for this project was provided by Putnam County and the New York Council on the Arts Local Incentive Funding Test, administered by the Putnam Arts Council. Additional funds were contributed by the Putnam Valley Rotary Club.